Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa on this Thursday. Tonight, bail reform on the books.
Today we are changing the law with a stronger focus on public safety.
Justice Minister Sean Fraser introduces bail reform legislation, long called for by premiers and opposition. Does it go far enough? The minister will be here in moments and I'll ask him then. Selling sacrifice?
It will take some sacrifices. And it will take some time.
Mr. Carney, our youth have sacrificed enough.
The Prime Minister asks young Canadians to accept hurt now to weather the Trump trade storm. The Conservatives call him tone deaf. We're going to bring in our front bench on how the sales strategy might or might not work. Christy Clark, Marco Mendocino, James Moore, and Tony Clement will all be here coming up. And a formal admission from Canada's chief trade negotiator.
The Americans are moving to an approach which is sector by sector as opposed to global.
The Prime Minister warns Trump doesn't want a broad deal with Canada, setting the stage for sectoral showdowns that could pit regions and industries against each other. Our front bench will take a look at what that all means as well for the CUSMA review. That's a little later on in the show. First, though.
Today's bill does not get rid of Liberal bail, and that means that there will be a lot of very serious and rampant offenders who will once again be released into our streets, often within hours of their most recent arrest. The police have said again and again, we have to scrap Liberal bail, get rid of the principle of restraint, so that if you are a rampant offender and you're newly arrested, it should be presumed that you're automatically staying behind bars until either you are acquitted or your sentence is complete.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre there reacting to one of the Liberals' marquee pieces of legislation this sitting, their long-awaited bail reform bill. It was introduced today, and here's what the bill will do if it passes and becomes law. Primarily, it would bring in a reverse onus requirement for major crimes. That means an accused would have to prove why they should get bail instead of the Crown proving why they should not. It would also mean consecutive sentences for violent and repeat offenders, but notably not consecutive life sentences, as the Supreme Court previously deemed that unconstitutional. It would also restrict conditional sentences if the bill passes into law. Sean Fraser is the Justice Minister and Attorney General. Hi, Minister. Welcome back to studio. Good to see you. Thank you for making the time.
It's good to be here with you.
Is this legislation a concession that your government got it wrong for the better part of a decade?
No, this is a response to the very real concerns that we've heard directly from Canadians. We hear in different parts of Canada different concerns, but overwhelmingly there's enormous consistency with Canadians writ large, with law enforcement, with provincial governments, that they wanted to see changes to bail laws and stronger sentences for serious crimes. So this is a response to the lived experience of Canadians that they've shared with us in advance of the last federal election and since, to make sure that our laws are up to the standard Canadians expect when it comes to protecting their families.
But the laws that were in place prior to the introduction of this legislation, should it pass, were laws that the Liberals specifically put on the book. So we'll start, for example, in 2019 with C-75, which introduced the principle of restraint, codified the principle of restraint, led to a lot of backlash from law enforcement, federal opposition, as well as premiers who were asking for bail reform at that time. Your government introduced bail reform in 2023. Clearly it didn't go far enough, or we wouldn't be here today. Why should Canadians trust you to fix a problem that you had a hand in creating?
So we will always want to iterate in response to the concerns that we hear from Canadians. There are certain elements of the laws that you've referenced that remain in effect today that actually do good things, making it harder for people charged with intimate partner violence to be released on bail, for example. But we do need to go further, and we need to acknowledge where the laws that we've put in place under the previous government need to be changed. We can't dig in and insist forever and a day that we've always been right. When we hear from Canadians and from law enforcement and from provincial governments who run the bail system that we need changes, we should take those concerns seriously. What I'm confident in, though, is that particularly with the validation we've seen of this bill from our law enforcement partners and from provincial governments, is that we've hit the mark. The new laws that we're introducing today are going to improve public safety when it comes both to bail and when it comes to sentencing for serious crimes that have been committed across the country.
Is there a substantive reason, beyond just pressure from political actors, for you to introduce this legislation, or is it inherently political? Are you doing this because, for example, the issue of crime and your perceived weakness on it cost your party a majority, or are you doing it because you think it will actually fix a problem?
So we are orienting the entire initiative behind what's going to help keep communities safe. We have heard very directly from people, less about their political concerns and they want us to match a provincial government or another party. We've heard that they're scared. People are afraid in certain communities and they want the law to protect them. Now, we think this is going to make a meaningful difference when it comes to improving public safety, but we also know that the job isn't done. We're going to have to work with law enforcement and with provincial partners, again, who run the system, to ensure that the changes we make have the resources behind them to actually be implemented. But we also know that the conversation about public safety is broader than bail and sentencing. Yes, we need tougher laws, not just on bail and sentencing, on intimate partner violence, protecting kids online, combating hate, but we also need to make the investments on the front line with law enforcement to help protect communities and prevent crime, and to make the upstream investments in the long term around affordable housing and mental health to prevent crime for the long term.
So on the first part of when you're talking about additional resources, I think what really struck me is when I think back to the introduction of C-75, the stated purpose at the time was to do two things: address overcapacity in the jails, in the correctional system, and to address overrepresentation of minorities in the justice system. On the first, when you talk about additional resources, I listened to your press conference today. You firmly put the ball in the province's court. You said, hey guys, and I'm paraphrasing, but hey guys, you asked for this. You're going to have to make sure that it does what it's intended to do and deal with overcapacity. There are major overcapacity issues. I believe it's 100, some correctional facilities in Ontario are operating at 150% capacity. Are you going to, in this budget, put additional resources to addressing that? Because what you're introducing today will certainly compound that problem.
So what we introduced today was a response not only to the Government of Ontario, but I should take this opportunity to thank them, and in particular my counterpart, Attorney General Doug Downey, for his collaboration in developing some of these reforms. But one of the things that we learned through our extensive engagement with provincial partners is that the challenges in one province don't necessarily reflect the same challenges in another. Where it may be detention facilities in certain provinces, it could be Crown prosecutors, community policing may be a bottleneck in others. There are different systemic challenges that appear in different parts of the system in different regions of the country. The measures that we're putting in place today had virtually unanimous support amongst provincial governments, and given that they are responsible for administering the system and they wanted these changes, we certainly expect that they're going to match these changes with necessary resources. Now, we're going to remain at the table to have conversations about what the appropriate role for the federal government is, particularly in areas of federal jurisdiction, but this is a conversation where I'm not interested in picking a fight or pointing fingers. I've had a very positive experience working together with provinces who I think get it, who I think want to solve this problem, and we want to be a meaningful partner who does our job, and we expect that they're going to do theirs as well.
But what is your job? Because my question is about what happens if the problem you thought C-75 was going to fix ends up getting a lot worse by taking away some of what was put in place. And by that I mean that the justice system becomes even more delayed and more fraught with additional cases that can't be handled in a timely manner, and that the correctional facilities become even more at higher levels of overcapacity. I take your point that it's not in every province, but there are some pretty staggering statistics about capacity in nearly every single province. So what is your role? Are you prepared to put more resources if necessary?
So in terms of our role, we certainly own the text of the criminal code. And when we're delivering on the measures that Canadians are asking for, I can't in good faith say that because there are challenges with capacity and detention, that we should do something less than put forward the laws that we think will promote public safety. We have to start with...
that's basically what you did in the last government.
This is a new government, and there is a different approach that's being taken. I am...
Same party, to be fair.
Yeah, certainly, we are the Liberal Party of Canada. You're right about that, but I can tell you the focus that I'm taking to this particular initiative is designed to ensure that we have a legal framework in place that will promote public safety. To the extent that there are downstream implications within the system, we want to work with provinces. That may include, I got a question at the press conference today about reviewing the judicial complement that certain provinces are are facing based on the caseload in their courts. When it comes to the operation of the provincial court system, of the bail system, where disproportionately the responsibilities fall to the provinces, we do anticipate that they're going to need to inject resources into the system.
So will you provide them? That's my question.
Look, I am not broadcasting budget decisions that have not been made public, but my goal here is to figure out if there is a mess in my own backyard, I want to clean that up first. We've taken a major step in the right direction with the legislation that we've tabled today. To the extent there are other areas that fall within federal jurisdiction, whether that's federal RCMP, border officials, whether that's the judges whose costs falls to the federal government, there are spaces where we need to continue to do our job. But my sense is working with provinces, they know what their responsibilities are and they want to take action as well.
If the problem is violent criminals out on bail recommitting crimes, are you certain that this time, this sort of second shot at things will actually, as you put it, solve the problem to the fullest scope that it can? And I will sort of back end that question by saying, why not repeal the principle of restraint?
Certainly. So the challenges are so much broader than any one principle. I do think that the legislation we put in place today takes a meaningful step towards addressing public safety concerns that are very real that we've heard about. But we know that in order to solve the problem, we will need those provincial governments to step up with resources. But we also need to make the upstream investments that I mentioned at the outset of this conversation around mental health and addictions, around affordable and supportive housing, around programs for youth. If we want to take a long-term view, these are the kinds of things that will prevent crime from taking place in the first place and will have a profound impact. But we have to take action in the short term, A, to help improve public safety, but B, to ensure that Canadians have faith in the administration of justice.
I'm not sure that answers my question. Why not repeal what you codified and led to this issue in the first place, which is the principle of restraint? Why still have that on the books if it has in any way contributed to this issue?
So the principle of restraint, if you repealed precisely the section that was adopted in Bill C-75, would still exist because it didn't come from the federal government. It came from the Supreme Court of Canada. Its codification, in my conversations, has led to the misapplication of the principle of restraint, in my view. We've taken a major step with the legislation we've tabled today to significantly adjust the language in the criminal code about the principle of restraint, specifically saying that bail hearings are not going to mandate the release of a person, and if you're going to contemplate the release, you have to be satisfied that they don't pose a threat to the public safety or to the public's faith in the administration of justice. This is a significant change that will change the way that the principle of restraint actually operates. We want to ensure that public safety is a paramount concern when courts hear cases about bail and frankly about sentencing as well. But to answer your question, this is a major change on the principle of restraint to recognize that it has been applied in a way, in some instances, that we hadn't intended under the previous government when that legislation was put forward.
And I take you at your word, but when you were saying that, I literally had a flashback to 2023 when the person who occupied your position was saying the exact same thing. Basically, we've taken a step, we think we'll address what the principle of restraint, the codification of it, led to, if I pull up the quote, the laws on bail that we currently have are clear. If one poses a threat to society, he or she should not be out on bail. Ultimately, it didn't go far enough. What if this doesn't go far enough? Why are you hesitating to use like the maximum amount of tools you have at your disposal? Why keep any remnant of that principle on the books?
Well, this really came from the engagement process with law enforcement and provincial partners in particular. Though you do hear calls in the House of Commons about this one very specific narrow issue, that is not the main source of consternation that we heard amongst Canadians or the people who work within or manage the justice system. Overwhelmingly, they told us that we needed to adopt the kinds of measures that are included in this bill. We could probably get a political point with our opposition in the House of Commons by just doing what they want. But I would rather take my advice from the people who work in law enforcement and the people who manage the justice system, who understand the challenges that are actually being experienced as these things play out in real time.
I'm not asking just because of politics. I'm asking because I've had this conversation with your predecessors on numerous occasions, and I was told the same thing, this is going to work, and it didn't. Ultimately, how will Canadians know? How will they be able to judge whether or not this legislation does go far enough?
Well, one of the things that you'll find with my approach to this file, and frankly, just life more broadly, you have to continuously look for ways to improve the job that you're doing. We are going to monitor, in collaboration with provinces and territories, the impact that the measures that we've just put into legislation, or put into a bill rather, that's going through the House, we're going to monitor the impact that they have. We are going to need to partner with provinces and territories who are in a better position to collect data about that, to understand whether the measures are having the intended impact. To the extent they are, that's great news, and we'll be happy about the improved public safety circumstances Canadians enjoy. If the laws are not having their intended effect, then we need to continue to revisit how they may be changed. But just a final point on this. We have to understand why policies work or don't work. Sometimes it is the text of the law. We've made some changes today. Sometimes it's whether the system behind the law are appropriately resourced to deliver justice to Canadians.
But like in a black and white way, Canadians who are watching tonight who are concerned about people who are out on bail committing violent crimes, like, do you anticipate what you're doing here will lead to fewer of them doing that?
I think to start, remember when you're dealing with bail and sentencing, you're dealing with people who are before a court after a charge has been laid, typically after a crime has been committed. Certainly there's a deterring effect when you have stronger sentences that could prevent future crime, but this is about delivering justice for people who have been charged with a crime, who have been convicted and are being sentenced.
Justice for them?
No. Delivering justice for Canadians when those circumstances have been presented, obviously, and thank you for the clarification. There are other measures we need to do to help prevent crime as well, including those upstream investments, including more support for the front line, whether it's at the border, whether it's in our communities. You can't hive off a narrow portion of the justice system and tell Canadians that this one thing is going to solve all of their problems, but you can say this is an essential step towards a more complete picture of the strategy of how we're going to improve public safety. I'm confident it's going to have a positive impact. To the extent that we need to take further action in the future, we're going to keep an open door for ideas that come in from partners in law enforcement, with the provinces, or with Canadians more broadly, to understand how we can deliver better public safety outcomes in every part of the country.
I'll leave it on that note. Minister, a pleasure. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's good to see you again.
All right, that's Attorney General Sean Fraser. Just last hour, Prime Minister Mark Carney paid a visit to the Toronto Blue Jays, checking out team practice just a day ahead of the team's first World Series face-off against the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Prime Minister was asked, and here's where it's relevant to the context of our conversation this evening, he was asked about whether or not U.S. President Donald Trump and himself are placing any bets on the game.
Well, you know what? I think he's afraid. I think he's afraid to make a bet. He doesn't like to lose. He hasn't called. He hasn't returned my call yet on the bet, so I'm ready. We're ready to make a bet with the U.S., and we're going to be back in the Jays all the way.
Coming up, hit or miss, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivers a pre-budget speech emphasizing both generational investment, as he termed it, and sacrifice. Was it mission accomplished? Our front bench with Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement. There they all are. They're back with me in just 2 minutes. Stay right there.
Apparently nobody over there watched the depressing, miserable, hopeless speech the Prime Minister gave to Canadian youth yesterday. He said that Canadian youth need to sacrifice more. The youth of this country have sacrificed enough.
The only person who's miserable when the Prime Minister speaks, Mr. Speaker, is the Leader of the Opposition. What the Prime Minister is talking about is spending less and investing more.
It is too bad that that minister didn't write the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, because it wouldn't have bored and depressed to tears all of those poor students.
And here's what that budget's going to do. It's going to give young people all over this country the ability to stand up and say, that's where my future lies, in Canada.
Reaction there in the House of Commons after the Prime Minister's budget address delivered to an audience of students at the University of Ottawa. Prime Minister Mark Carney asked those young Canadians to sacrifice now while the federal government seeks to invest their way through Trump's trade war. Have a listen.
And to be clear, we won't transform our economy easily or in a few months. It will take some sacrifices, and it will take some time. And when we have to make difficult choices, we will be thoughtful, we'll be transparent, and we'll be fair.
Did the speech hit the right marks, and how will political parties position themselves ahead of the budget? Let's bring in our front bench. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is here. She's now a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Marco Mendicino is former chief of staff to Prime Minister Mark Carney, as well as a former Liberal cabinet minister. CTV political analyst and former Conservative industry minister James Moore is with us. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. And Tony Clement served in senior roles in Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper's cabinet. He's now CEO of Tony Clement International. Hi, everybody. Really nice to see you tonight. Thanks for making the time. James, I'll start with you because we were together last night watching the speech live on TV and sort of had our initial reactions. You've had a day to kind of digest it. We saw what the reaction was from the opposition today. Ultimately, what mark do you think this speech did or didn't leave?
Well, I'll give it a letter grade. I suppose it was a C. It lacked both sizzle and steak. Wasn't a bad speech, but I think it was mostly forgotten by the time most people brushed their teeth before bed last night, and nobody's talking about it today. So it was a missed opportunity. And when you raise the expectation of having a primetime speech in the Eastern time zone anyway, a primetime speech where you tell people, you know, the budget's coming up, it's a watershed budget. We've been hyping up the importance of this budget, what it means for Canada, given our threats from President Trump, and here we go. And then you deliver a speech that was mostly a lot of the same stuff and not a lot of zip to it. I think it was a bit of a missed moment. There was no bad moment in the speech, but there was just no captivating moment that I think people can cling on to and repeat through social circles and say, you know, this is a really special thing. So a missed moment, but not a bad moment, but for sure a missed moment.
The opposition today in the Conservatives, Christy, have really gleaned on to the message around sacrifice in the fact that it was made at the University of Ottawa to a mostly younger audience. And you see that sort of positioning from the Conservatives that we saw a lot during the campaign, which was, you know, talking very specifically to that cohort of Canadians who feel very, you know, not able to get ahead and, you know, not that there are not jobs out there, and sort of criticizing the Prime Minister on that point specifically. Why do you think that's what they went after?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that young people a lot of them voted for the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre, and they were hoping for, you know, something different than they got. So there's no doubt that the Conservatives would want to exploit the speech and talk about, you know, how the sacrifice, they shouldn't have to sacrifice. Well, seriously, did anybody think that Pierre Poilievre wasn't going to be cutting a lot of programs that might benefit young people? And I think that's what Carney was talking about. And James and I would disagree a little bit about this, I think. I think it was very unusual for any prime minister to stand up there. This hasn't happened in over a decade. To stand up there and say, hey, listen, it's not all roses out there. This is going to be really tough. And there is going to be some sacrifice required. It is a very tough message for a politician to bring. But I think it was really important that he bring it, because that is exactly what we are facing after 10 years of a smothered economy, and now we're facing all the tariffs from the United States. So he has no easy task. I'm not at all surprised that he's trying to lower expectations. On the other hand, though, I would say, Vashi, he talks about jobs, and they are going to be spending like a lot of money. And you know, people can argue about that too, but the thing is, they'll be spending that money trying to create jobs by building big infrastructure. So, I think he's right to disabuse people of the notion that this is all going to be easy. It isn't, but it wouldn't have been easy for any government in any case.
What do you think, Marco, is the message that the Prime Minister and the government is trying to telegraph 2 weeks out from the budget about what it is supposed to be?
That we're living in a time of great change and transition, and as a result, we are going to have to make some tough choices, but that there is a silver lining, and that silver lining is each other through our skills, our smarts, and ultimately our solidarity. And I think if there is one principle that is sort of divulged by the set of remarks, it's coming back to building one Canadian economy. I want to pick up on the 2 points that my colleagues James and Christy made. I do think that there was a moment here, and that moment was to level with Canadians broadly and more specifically with young people who have been disproportionately impacted by the turmoil in the economy in the form of higher unemployment. The number one criticism that politicians hear all the time is that there's just too much BS. And so I think that the Prime Minister was trying to cut through that and say that there is this budget that's coming up, that there will be some tough choices that need to be made, but that we are going to invest. We're going to invest by getting our energy energy to market. We're going to invest by doing some things around making housing more affordable, particularly for young people. And we're going to invest in you. And that is the scene-setting point of last night. Now, I acknowledge that you didn't get the exclamation mark and it wasn't punctuated by clear resolution. That's what the budget is about. But we are talking about it, I would say, with respect to James. And I think that that was also the point, is getting people to pay attention ahead of the budget. So I do think it was a moment, and it was a moment that was captured by the Prime Minister.
Well, I'm forcing the discussion, just to be. I'm teasing. Tony, what are your thoughts, just jumping off what Marco said? I mean, if that is what the government hoped the message was, do you think that is the message that landed for people who did watch the speech?
Well, I think we'll know where it lands on November 4th. Really, this was a setup for the budget. Not a lot. I mean, I remember that commercial, that Wendy's commercial, "Where's the beef?" You're all too young for that commercial, but I remember it. So I think we do have to see some sacrifice. What does that mean? What sort of sacrifice? Who's making the sacrifice? Investments? What sort of investments? Who is going to be in charge of those investments? And is that the private sector? Is it the public sector? A combination? These are all unanswered questions. So I think that, sure, the Prime Minister wants to speak to a wider audience in anticipation of the budget. I get that. He wants to set the table. But really, we want to see what the meal is.
I thought what was interesting today, they held a press conference, Premier Ford, and Prime Minister Carney, James. And one of the questions from a reporter was exactly what Tony just laid out. Like, what does sacrifice actually, what is it in reference to? When you talk about sort of restraint or the operating budget, like, what are we looking at? And it was there weren't many details provided, but what I did glean from it was it wasn't necessarily, there will be programs that are cut. It's just that he intimated that programs and certain projects would not accelerate or expand to the degree he said that they would like them to. So that was the only kind of specific piece of information that was added today. What do you take from that?
Yeah, look, I like I preferred the way in which Marco articulated the dynamic in front of us, frankly, than the Prime Minister did last night, about sort of sending a flare up into the night sky and saying, there are some tough times ahead of us, but a dawn awaits. And so I think that's important. But look, the Prime Minister, he's also captured, and there's some sympathy, I think, here that's owed, right? He is still captured by the realities of a minority parliament. 6 out of the last 8 federal elections have yielded minority parliaments, which handcuffs him from making, frankly, some of the bold decisions that are necessary in order to right the ship. There was a report that came out today by the chief economist of the National Bank where they pointed out that Canada's manufacturing sector is now smaller than that of Ireland. Ireland, a country of about 5.5 million people. Our manufacturing base has shrunken, and then we have the Stellantis decision, we have the Peterbilt decision. We have a lot of really challenging economic dynamics in front of us, and I think a dispassionate, substantive, and thoughtful Prime Minister just sort of saying, these are tough times. Tougher times are probably ahead. The President of the United States has clearly declared an economic war on Canada. We're trying to mitigate that the best we can, but we're going to have to work together as a government and citizens to make sure that we look out for each other and we have better days ahead, and we're doing everything we can to get that done. But the reality is, of course, in a budget is you have to make some decisions. And this minority parliament, I think, is going to create challenges for the Prime Minister that he's going to find very frustrating, that'll sort of pivot him away from having to make some of the broader, more sweeping changes that are necessary. Prime Minister Chrétien had the virtue of a clear majority parliament in 1995 to deliver that watershed budget, and he had a fractured Conservative opposition. So he had a clear runway in front of him to do a lot of things and have 2 years to recover from it politically and go into the 97 campaign. Mark Carney doesn't have that kind of room in front of him. So how he does this budget and how he politically maneuvers is going to be one of the unique and critical challenges of, frankly, maybe the last half century of Canadian politics.
Your colleagues are all nodding as you say that. Christy, I have about 30 seconds left. The last word on that to you. How big of a challenge do you think that will be?
I think Canadians are more ready for it than we think, and I think that young Canadians, we're underestimating them if we think that they don't know that this is all going to be hard. They're facing AI, powered by quantum. It's not easy for them already. I actually think that young people's expectations are lower now than they might have been, 10, 15 years ago, and he's trying to speak to that. So I've delivered a bunch of budget speeches where I've had to say, you know what, this isn't going to be all shits and giggles here, folks. This is going to be tough. And I think, in my experience of that, people understand what life is like out there. They understand how hard it is. So I think it's always hard to navigate these things, but it's necessary. And I think that the Canadians that voted for Mark Carney understood that they were doing so believing that he would do what was necessary.
All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. The backdrop to everything we're talking about is, of course, what's going on with Donald Trump. We've got some new details on the trade war front up next with our front bench. Stay right there.
In the situation we're in right now with the United States, with the negotiations we're having with the United States, is we're having very detailed, specific, constructive negotiations for the steel industry, the aluminum industry. There's elements of the energy industry, a few other components in there, because the Americans are moving to an approach which is sector by sector as opposed to global. There will be a review of our overall agreement, the CUSMA agreement with the U.S. and Mexico, that's coming up in a few months' time, and so broader aspects will be brought there.
Prime Minister Mark Carney there on trade negotiations with the U.S. The Prime Minister formally conceding a broader deal with the Americans is not what the White House is putting on the table now, and strongly hinting any deal on autos will likely instead be part of CUSMA renegotiations, or the formal review taking place starting next year. There's also some new developments at this hour on that sector to share with you. Sources confirmed to CTV that the feds will limit tariff-free vehicle imports by Stellantis and GM after the two companies announced limiting or ending some Canadian production in favor of U.S. expansion. That news was first reported by the CBC. What to read into it all? Let's bring back our front bench. Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement. Marco, I'll start with you just on that decision around Stellantis and GM, first of all, because that's been huge news over the past 2 weeks, in particular where Stellantis is concerned, because they were explicit. We're moving this production of the Jeep Compass to the U.S., creating 3,000 jobs, investing $14 billion south of the border, and it's not going to happen in Brampton anymore. How significant do you view this move by the feds?
Well, let's wait and see once it's officially confirmed from either the minister or the prime minister. But I would say this is in the wake of Stellantis' announcement, which caused a lot of consternation in the auto sector. Look, I think the prime minister is doing exactly what the president of the United States said he was doing, which is, he's negotiating hard. He's fighting for Canada. He's fighting for workers, and particularly the sectors that have been most impacted by the tariffs. So, look, what do we got? Roughly a couple 100,000 people that work in the auto sector. You got 1.5 million cars that are made in Canada. The vast majority of those cars are sold back to the United States. I mean, the whole point of having an auto pact is to leverage the integration and the skill set of these two labor forces. And I think it makes total sense to continue to fight for that principle as we go forward. Now, I would just say in closing that there is reason to believe, if you track the comments on both sides, that we are getting closer. But I would say that optimism, closer to a deal, I beg your pardon, but that optimism is guarded. And it's guarded because we've seen in the cycle of negotiations some stops and some starts. So, I think it's important to wait and see what follows next. But the Prime Minister is fighting, and he's getting kudos not only from the President, but from Doug Ford, who said he backs the Prime Minister 1,000%. Those are his words. And I think that's an encouraging sign of solidarity at a time when we need it.
I think what was also interesting in the comments from the Prime Minister, Tony, around formally saying this is what they're looking for. They're looking for sector by sector. And we've talked about how that has become more obvious over the past few weeks, but it also made me think about what that means for CUSMA, right? If the Americans have very little interest in broad-based negotiations that encompass everything, this may be what we feel is already a bad situation, could get a lot worse next year.
Yeah, let's be clear. And President Trump has been clear. He wants the entire auto sector in the United States of America. He's been very clear on that. All of his activities and actions by his administration further that goal. The Stellantis decision furthers that goal. So that's what we're up against, folks. And, I was part of the rescue of the Canadian auto sector back in 2008. And we had some tough negotiations with the Americans then. We managed to stave off losing the auto sector then. But President Trump, I think, is very clear on this point, and it's going to be very tough for any Canadian government, regardless of political stripe, when they negotiate with President Trump on that particular sector.
Yeah, where does that leave us, I guess? Because I agree with Tony Christie. It's the most explicit that the White House is on the auto sector, right? Howard Lutnick said it just a week ago, I think, when we had convened, and was very explicit in that case too. We want Canada to be second. We will maybe buy some parts, and that's it. Like, how do you contend with that kind of thing that you're up against?
Well, you know, you asked the question, Vashi, is this significant? I think the question is it significant or is it just necessary? And what watching this from British Columbia, you say, having done some of these kinds of negotiations myself, I would say, look, when you're dealing with a very, very big, much more powerful partner, you've got to give them something along the way. And this is not where Canada wants to be. But it's always, I think, been apparent to lots of people in Canada that we've had an incredible deal when it comes to auto parts and car making in Canada under CUSMA. It's been great for Canada, but it's always been something that has been threatened again and again throughout our relationship with the United States. So not surprising that this is what President Trump is doing. I don't know, I don't see a path to trying to stop this, except to say, I guess to take the route that Prime Minister Carney is taking, which is to accept these incremental decisions one by one and hope that it continues to make the case to President Trump that we are steady partners, that we are going to do our very best to get this settled, and that we're going to try and get this done in a way that's as amicable as possible between our two countries. I mean, we don't have a lot of other choices here, and it stinks. It's terrible for people, and particularly in Ontario. But I don't think this bodes well for CUSMA. And and it certainly, obviously, doesn't mean anything good for people who are working in the auto sector in Canada.
Well, I wonder also, like, what incentive, when Donald Trump sees all of these companies do exactly what he said that the tariffs would make them do, like, what incentive, James, he has to reach any agreement? Like, Stellantis would know that they faced this possible conclusion. It was part of what, there were certain remittance allowances that were contingent on production remaining in Canada. So they would have known when they made that decision that that was a possibility. They would have known they could be sued based on whatever the contracts are that we don't know the details of yet, but that the government, both levels of government, had with them. And they still took the decision that they did. Like, what incentive does Trump have if that is the case with all these big companies?
Yeah, look, at Stellantis, the management and the board are trying to mitigate risk on a longer-term time horizon than frankly, the political cycles. You take Donald Trump out of the picture, and the reality is that if you look at the steel industry in Pennsylvania, the auto industry in the state of Michigan, in 2012 and 2016 and 20 and 24 and probably 28 and probably 2032, those are going to be two swing states in the Electoral College for a very long time. And so the politics around auto jobs and the repatriation of those investments and those mandates into those factories into Michigan are going to be pure politics in both the Republican and Democratic parties, in the steel industry in Pennsylvania as well. So the long-term play here for Canada is going to be a challenging one. But also for the Americans is that if all they're trying to do is repatriate the manufacturing and the final assembly of auto jobs into the United States, at some point you reach full capacity in the United States and you need to turn around and engage the world and sell those cars. Well, Canada is the 5th largest auto-consuming country in the world. I think we purchase between 1.5 and 2 million new cars per year. Well, at a certain point, Canadians are going to say, Stellantis, take your vehicles and shove them into the river. I'm not interested in them. So at some point, these auto manufacturers need to realize that Canadians also consume vehicles. We're a big country. We're a commuter country. We like our cars. And we're not going to play nice, and we're not going to purchase these vehicles. So they have to sort of play the game with Donald Trump, look at a long-term time horizon, but look at the really long-term time horizon and realize that Canadians have purchasing power that they can't ignore, and Canadians have long memories on these things as well.
That's right. Okay, I got to leave it there. I'm out of time. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Go, Jays, go. How could we can't like
The
I was
truly
at that
Canadian message
game
of the
7.
evening, yeah.
I was at that game
I
7.
know,
It was
you're
insane.
very lucky.
So go Jays, go.
Well, if you have another 20 grand, you can take all of
I
us to
don't.
game 1 on Friday. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Our front bench, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, Christy Clark, and Tony Clement. We'll take a quick break here on Power Play. On the other end of that break, our series interviewing candidates to lead the NDP continues. One of those candidates, Rob Ashton.
We're in a class war. It's the ruling class versus the working class. And we have to be loud about it. And we got to rally the troops.
I don't need to win with 62% of the vote. I need to get more New Democrats elected. We need to win in more seats.
We say, if you have a problem, you've got 3 choices. You can do the same harder, or make a change. I think it's time to make a change.
It can't be message boxes. It can't be carefully sculpted phrases. We are NDPers. We need to connect with working class people.
You want people to feel inspired and invigorated and ready to go. And in order to do that, you have to establish that trust.
Highlights from last night's NDP Leadership Forum. The party will elect its next leader in March, and there's still time for candidates to join. Here's the field so far, from left to right. Neil Johnston, Abby Lewis, Tony McQuail, Heather McPherson, and Rob Ashton. And we're continuing our series here on Power Play of interviews with those candidates. Here's Rob Ashton. Hi, Mr. Ashton. It's good to meet you. Welcome to the studio. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks for giving me some time. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it as well. Why do you want this job?
Why do I want this job? Because, quite honestly, I've spent far too long watching Liberals and Conservatives lie to Canadians and nothing actually being done for workers. And I got fed up with it. And I figured it's time for me to put my money where my mouth is, or to shut up and I don't shut up. And we had to make positive change for workers. And this is what I plan on bringing to the party and to Ottawa when I get elected, is to bring positive change for workers and bring workers back to Ottawa so we can run this country.
Your message seems, given your history, obviously, and what I've heard so far, very focused on workers and, like you said, quote unquote, bringing them back to the party. What does that mean for people who don't classify themselves that way, but who have traditionally supported the NDP, or who might think about doing it in the future? Are you pushing them away?
Not at all. So I've been quoted a lot saying it's working class versus ruling class. And when I say working class envelopes everybody. It envelopes people that work on the docks. It envelopes people that work in office tower, you, for example, as well. It envelopes marginalized people. It envelopes Indigenous people, members of the LGBTQ+ community. It envelopes everybody. Somebody that can't go to work for whatever reason, they can't get a job, or for whatever other reason. It envelopes all of us. And that's what the working class means to me.
What would you do to advance the position of the working class should you be successful and become leader of the party?
So that's a pretty easy question to answer for me, and it would be jobs. It would be good Canadian jobs in good Canadian industries, jobs that provide workers and their families a stable life, where they can afford groceries, they can afford rent, they can afford a mortgage. Because right now all we see whatever form of government we have, and it swaps between Liberals and Conservatives all the time, is we see billions of dollars of payouts going to corporations. But we don't see money be invested into the working class. They ignore us and they let us wither and die on the vine. And that's something that we're going to bring to the workers of this country.
But what exactly will get them those jobs? Like, it's one thing to say, I want the workers of this country to have good paying Canadian jobs. It's another thing to create policies that provide for an environment in which those jobs can be creative. Yeah. What's an example of something policy-wise that you would introduce that could create those jobs?
So 2 quick things. So we've had softwood lumber issues between Canada and the United States for decades. But the US, or the Canadian government, hasn't done really much to help the mill workers. So what our plans are is we're going to go on a plan to build houses. And I'm talking thousands of houses. I'm talking tens of thousands of houses, if not more, across the country. And it's houses that won't affect the market value of like a house that I own or a house that you own if you own a home. It's going to be co-op type housing on public lands.
Isn't that what the Liberals are doing? Like, that's what they just pitched with their housing agency.
But they're not doing it, though. They're not doing enough of it. And this is what we plan on doing. And we plan on doing enough of it where your average citizen has a home to live in. Because the Liberals and the Conservatives have forgotten about probably about 70% of the workers out there and people that don't have homes right now. And so that's why our plan is to build tens of thousands of homes across the country, which using Canadian materials and Canadian tradespeople, because if we're starting to use our lumber, that's going to spur on our mills and hopefully take some of the pressure off the US-Canada trade in softwood. And it's every single province, every single territory we're going to do this in.
Just to be sure, though, because your primary criticism is Liberals and Conservatives, if they're in government, are lying to you, they're not representing your interests. Like, what you just pitched is exactly what the Liberals are doing. You're just saying to a bigger scale?
Yeah, because we need houses. We don't plan on allowing developers to build houses. We plan on the Canadian government to build the houses. Right? And I think that's the difference there. And the other
Can we afford to do that, with all due respect, with $56 billion in interest payments alone this year?
You know what? Of course we can. Because if you look at our tax bases, it's the Canadian workers that get taxed. And that's all I hear about is our tax rates are going up, we're getting taxed to death, the workers are. And so we have to get away from that. If we started taxing those that can afford it, the billionaires, the millionaires, taxing their wealth, and they can start paying their fair share, then that brings in more money for us to do these projects to help Canadians.
So you would increase taxes on a certain income bracket?
You bet. It would also be like tax on their wealth, right?
What do you mean by that?
So tax on their wealth. So if they if they earn, pick a number. We're still drafting our platforms, our policies, because I'm 3 weeks into this political gig, and so if you pick a number, say if their earnings are $20 million a year or $10 million a year, then you start taxing any dollar over that. And so that brings in money into the coffers of the Canadian government. The other part is if they own businesses that earn, pick a number, $10 million, we'll just stick with that because it's a nice round number, then we start taxing anything over that, right? Because we need the wealth to stay in this country. We don't need the wealth going and hidden in accounts like in the Grand Caymans or stuff like that. We need to close loopholes that the rich and some of the larger corporations utilize to get out of paying their fair share of taxes as well.
In principle, I completely understand that. Yeah. We're in a very unique economic situation right now where we are seeing, record amount of business flight from Canada to the United States. Is layering on additional taxes right now the right decision, given that?
That's a good question. But the answer is there's been times in our history where we've given corporations billions of dollars to bail them out and they're still leaving. So we either give them billions of dollars and then watch them leave a few years later, or we try to get what's owed to Canadians instead of it coming out of our pocketbooks.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Ashton, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate it. Best of luck in your candidacy.
Thanks, appreciate it.
That's Rob Ashton. He's running for the leadership of the NDP. We'll take a quick commercial break. We're back in a moment here on Power Play. Welcome back to Power Play. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre faced some more questions in the wake of controversial comments he made about the RCMP and his accusations that they covered up Trudeau-era scandals. Poilievre insists he was referring to former Commissioner Brenda Lucki and not the leadership of the force as a whole. CTV National News producer Rachel Haynes asked Mr. Poilievre if he would meet with current RCMP Commissioner Mike Duhem. Here's what he had to say.
Mr. PM, could I just ask you if you've met yet with RCMP Commissioner Mike Duhem? He's downstairs right now. Have you set up a meeting with him?
He has not reached out.
Commissioner Duhem was then asked to respond to that and whether he wanted a meeting with Mr. Poilievre. Have a listen.
Listen, I find myself privileged to be the commissioner of the RCMP to represent such a great organization. I said what I had to say last Thursday. I'm not going to come back on that.
Do you want another meeting with him, or do you want a meeting with him?
The door's always open.
All right, that does it for us tonight on Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelis. Thank you so much for watching. Your top headlines are just ahead. Have a great evening.